leaders of both the Democratic People's Republic of Korea and the United States have sat down in Singapore to discuss the nuclear power of the DPRK and to possibly work out a roadmap to peace between the two countries. The U.S. was looking for denuclearization, while the DPRK was looking for relief from sanctions. Now, this meeting inside of Singapore with both the leaders of the U.S. and the DPRK is a historic moment, regardless of what you think of either one of these men or their policies. And finally, a leader from the Democratic People's Republic and the United States of America sitting down and having talks is something that was absolutely unheard of in merely even a year ago, something that was perceived to be impossible. And of course, the liberal media has found a way to attack Trump for doing this, despite the fact that the liberal media has always claimed that it was anti-war, anti-violence, etc. This is really no different. This is no different than Fox News attacking Obama or any other kind of Democrat for the same thing. There's nothing unique here. This is just politics in general, the Democratic Party attacking the Republican Party for something that they would do, and the same thing would happen vice versa. Now, what's interesting to note here is that Trump said that despite the fact that the meeting was only a few hours long, this did require him to stay up for 24 consecutive hours. I'm not entirely certain as to why he felt it was necessary to bring this up, but it's something important, at least to him. Now, the main crux of this whole meeting was over the issue of the denuclearization of the DPRK. Now, the United States is looking for a way to try to curb the DPRK nuclear program. This is very difficult to do in the face of the DPRK being under threat from the United States militarily since the creation of the country, essentially. Now, the whole thing was very reducible to this one issue. If the DPRK denuclearizes, then the U.S. will provide sanctions relief. See, now the problem with that is the agreement didn't give any kind of time frame or give any kind of details for what denuclearizing the peninsula would do. Essentially, both men entered into this meeting saying, okay, if you give up the nukes, we'll take away the sanctions. And the DPRK said, okay. But there were no details on when that would happen, how that would happen, etc. So, which means basically for the DPRK, it's not going to happen. Now, it's very important to keep in mind here that this whole nuclear diplomacy, this having nukes, is what brought the United States to the negotiating table. Throughout history, the United States has had basically free hand to do almost anything it wants. However, there have been deterrence against invasion. For example, the artillery aimed at the capital of the South, Seoul. But now with a nuclear deterrent, something that can even possibly reach the United States mainland, the United States is forced to come to the table and talk. This is a victory for the DPRK because they have forced the U.S. to finally give some kind of, to have a negotiation towards a possible ending of the war between the two, which frankly I really don't see happening anytime soon. Now, what the DPRK wants is promises of security. If you're not going to invade us, then we have no reason to have a nuclear deterrent. Frankly, we know that's not going to happen. The United States continually threatens and invades many countries around the world. So there is no reason for the DPRK to even believe them in this situation, even if they were going to be altruistic and honest, because the United States is still going to invade. There's a reason why they want rid of the DPRK's nukes, is because it is a deterrent against invasion. Now, if the U.S. wasn't threatening to invade them, which they constantly are, then they would have no problem with the DPRK having nukes. Yet that's not the situation we find ourselves in as a result of this. Now, one of the things was that Trump said that, oh, there's going to be an end to the war games, where they're going to stop doing that because it's provocation against the North. However, Mike Pence came out later and said that it was still happening. So I think this is a case where Trump said something and he didn't quite know exactly what he was saying or what he was doing. It was just something that he said to the media at the moment off the top of his head. And it seems like the war games are going to continue because in this situation, I tend to believe Mike Pence in this situation, unless Donald Trump steps in and actually makes it happen. So I really don't think that anything came out of this meeting at all. As historic as it is, and as a step towards peace, etc., I don't think this actually accomplished anything. Because all it did was an agreement for the DPRK to remove its nukes in exchange for getting rid of some of the sanctions. But we know the DPRK is not going to get rid of its nuclear weapons because it's a deterrent against invasion. So really, this whole thing was an act of theater. It was them coming together, saying things, and then nothing's going to come about as a result of this. So the whole thing was a complete exercise in futility, which I largely expected that it would be. There are very clearly defined points here. Get rid of the nukes. We will not get rid of the nukes. Remove the sanctions. We are not going to remove the sanctions. So we know both sides, neither side was going to budge on anything whatsoever. And the DPRK is right not to do so. They have a right to exist. They have a right not to be invaded. They have a right to determine their own destiny, whether you like the country or not. They have the right to live free from the threat of invasion by the United States, a threat of being placed under the thumb of the U.S. empire. But, you know, once again, we're still left with that same stalemate we were with when the nuclear weapons first came into existence. We're essentially right back there at the same position, just with more sanctions on the DPRK. They are not going to make a concession on this. They are not going to get rid of the nuclear weapons, because that's probably the most important thing that's keeping them from being invaded right now. And at the same time, there's a great deal of positive steps on between the two Koreas themselves for reunification, for peace, for economic cooperation, etc. The reunification process is already taking place between the two Koreas without the United States, and the United States is being left in the dust because both the South and the North are sick of the U.S. interfering with that process. So what's happening is Moon Jae-in has the political will, has the political capital, has the public support to go ahead and do all this and rebuke the United States, and is facing increasing calls from the public to get rid of the U.S. military that's occupying the country to the tune of about 32,000 U.S. soldiers. So the U.S. is definitely losing in this situation. The public opinion is turning against them because they are the ones sabotaging this, although that reputation has gone up a bit as a result of the summit between the two leaders, even though, frankly, I don't believe anything actually came out of it. So the DPRK is definitely winning in this situation. They have outmaneuvered the United States. They have outmaneuvered Donald Trump. And one of the main things that the DPRK needed to do was to survive long enough to have a nuclear deterrent. And that's what they have finally accomplished in this case. So this meeting, while it has not been the great productive thing that a lot of the media is claiming it to be, it is a big win for the DPRK. Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.